The morning began like any other in the quiet cul-de-sac of Maplewood Estates, a neighborhood that prided itself on its manicured lawns, pastel mailboxes, and identical driveways that looked cloned from a real estate brochure. Evan stood on his porch, coffee steaming in his hand, the golden sunlight washing over his modest brick home. It was the one place he'd poured his savings and sweat into, a sanctuary of order and peace. But that peace shattered the moment the familiar growl of an engine rolled down the street. The unmistakable rumble of a Porsche Cayenne echoed between the houses, followed by the squeal of tires as the silver SUV turned into his driveway, not stopping halfway, not slowing, just confidently pulling all the way up as if she owned the concrete beneath her wheels. Karen. The name itself carried a certain weight in the neighborhood. Mid-50s, blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and an attitude that could silence a room. She was the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, a vice president in title, but dictator in practice. She stepped out of the Porsche like it was a runway exit, balancing a tiny designer dog in her arm. "Morning, Evan," she chirped, not even glancing his way. She adjusted her sunglasses and began walking toward the HOA mailbox cluster, her high heels clicking with a rhythm of entitlement. Evan's jaw tightened. This wasn't the first time, or the second. It was the 7th time in 2 weeks. He called out, polite but firm, "Karen, you're parked on my driveway again." His tone was measured, trying not to let irritation slip through. She stopped, turned halfway, and smiled that smug, condescending smile. "Relax, Evan. It's just for a few minutes," she said, brushing him off like a mosquito. "You've got plenty of space. Besides, I'm on the HOA board. I think I can manage where I park." The way she said, "I'm on the HOA board," wasn't information, it was a threat. Evan tried reasoning, but she waved a manicured hand dismissively and continued walking. The dog yipped as if echoing her defiance. By noon, she was still parked there. Her Porsche gleamed in the sun, blocking his garage door, mocking him with its perfect reflection. Evan couldn't leave for his errands without calling a friend to pick him up from the curb. He took photos, time-stamped, clear evidence, and started flipping through his HOA handbook later that evening. He discovered that not only was she in violation of 3 separate property rules, but the HOA itself had no special parking privileges. Every homeowner was supposed to respect private driveways. The irony burned. The very person enforcing fines on others for mailbox heights and paint colors was now blatantly trespassing on his property. That night, as the street fell silent and porch lights flickered off one by one, Evan sat in his living room, scrolling through his phone gallery filled with pictures of her Porsche blocking his garage. Each photo felt like a challenge, a taunt. The neighborhood might have thought of Karen as untouchable, but Evan wasn't the kind of man to let arrogance slide forever. He took a slow sip of his coffee, set the mug down, and whispered to himself with a calm that hinted at brewing resolve, "Everyone has a limit." Outside, the reflection of the Porsche's headlights gleamed faintly through his window, a symbol of disrespect that wouldn't stay there much longer. The next HOA meeting took place on a humid Thursday evening inside the Maplewood Community Center, a sterile hall with folding chairs, fluorescent lighting, and a banner reading, "Keeping Our Neighborhood Beautiful." The irony wasn't lost on Evan as he sat in the back row, clutching a manila folder thick with printed photos of Karen's Porsche. The air was filled with the faint buzz of the overhead lights and the soft chatter of neighbors trying to sound civil while airing their grievances. At the front sat the board, 5 members behind a polished oak table, and right in the middle, with her trademark sunglasses perched atop her head like a crown, was Karen, presiding over the meeting as if she were royalty. When it came time for resident concerns, Evan stood. His voice was calm but steady, the kind of voice that carried truth and restraint. "I'd like to address a repeated issue, parking violations on my private driveway," he said, laying down his photos on the table one by one. The images were damning. The same silver Porsche, parked at different times, blocking his garage. The board members exchanged awkward glances. Karen leaned back in her chair, lips curling into that same smirk he'd seen a dozen times before. "Oh, come on, Evan," she said with a theatrical laugh that invited others to join. "You're making it sound like I've done something criminal. It's a shared neighborhood space. Don't be so territorial." Evan didn't flinch. "It's not shared, Karen. It's my property. And the HOA rules you enforce so passionately say so right here." He opened the rulebook, flipping to the highlighted section and reading it aloud. The room quieted. Even the other board members seemed uncertain. Karen's expression hardened for a brief second before she caught herself. "Well," she said finally, "I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." Her voice dripped with false sweetness, her smile tight and brittle. But the way she gripped her pen told Evan exactly what she was thinking. This wasn't over. When the meeting adjourned, neighbors filtered out, murmuring softly. Some patted Evan on the shoulder in quiet support, but no one dared speak too loudly against her. She was still the vice president of the HOA, after all. Evan was gathering his folder when he noticed Karen watching him from the doorway, her lips pressed into a thin, polite line. "You really went through all that trouble for a few photos?" she asked, tilting her head. "You should be careful, Evan. People who make noise in this neighborhood tend to attract attention." The tone wasn't threatening outright, but it carried enough venom to leave a chill in the air. Later that night, Evan found a folded piece of paper tucked under his welcome mat. It was written in looping cursive, unmistakably Karen's handwriting. "Next time you whine about my car, I'll fine you for harassment." He stared at it under the porch light, a slow smirk spreading across his face. The rules were no longer on her side, but she was too arrogant to realize it. As thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, Evan walked back inside, pinned the note to his corkboard, and poured himself a fresh cup of coffee. If she wanted to play games, he'd play, but on his terms this time. He wasn't just documenting anymore. He was planning. And for the first time in weeks, he felt something new, quiet satisfaction at the storm that was about to hit Maplewood Estates and its self-appointed queen. Saturday dawned bright and warm, the kind of day meant for calm mornings and yard work. But Evan had other plans. He stood in his garage, surrounded by tools, cardboard, and a single red marker in his hand. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and mischief. On the workbench lay his masterpiece, a giant white sign with bold red letters spelling out, "For sale, $10,000 OBO." Beneath it, written with satisfying precision, were the words, "Call Karen for details," followed by her real HOA office number. He couldn't help but grin. Every letter felt like a release, a small strike against the arrogance that had invaded his peace. As he hammered the sign into the edge of his driveway, the world seemed unusually quiet, as though the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. By late morning, the first ripple of chaos began. The Porsche sat gleaming in the driveway, its metallic paint reflecting sunlight like a mirror. The "For Sale" sign stood proudly beside it, drawing attention from every passing car. A couple walking their dog stopped to gawk. "Did Karen finally decide to sell her car?" the woman asked, snapping a quick photo with her phone. Teenagers on bikes circled by, laughing as they read the sign aloud. 10 grand. That's a steal." Within hours, photos of the Porsche and Evan's clever sign were all over the neighborhood group chat. The comments poured in, "Classic HOA karma," "Guess Karen's downsizing," and "About time someone stood up to her." Then came the phone calls. Dozens of them. Karen's phone began ringing non-stop, curious buyers asking if the Porsche on Maplewood Drive was still available. Some even stopped by in person, walking up to the car, peering through the windows, taking selfies. At one point, an older man in a baseball cap approached Evan while he trimmed his hedges. "You the owner?" he asked. Evan just shrugged, eyes twinkling. "No, but she parks it here a lot." "Maybe she is." The man nodded thoughtfully and left his number, saying he'd make an offer if it was legit. Evan could hardly contain his amusement. He wasn't yelling or fighting anymore. He was simply letting poetic justice do the talking. By early evening, the storm arrived. Karen's Porsche screeched to life as she pulled up in fury, slamming on the brakes and stepping out, her phone pressed to her ear. Her sunglasses couldn't hide the red flush creeping across her cheeks. "Evan!" she barked, storming across the driveway. "What the hell is this?" She jabbed a finger toward the sign, voice trembling with anger. He looked up from his lawn chair, calm and almost bored, and said, "Oh, that? Well, since it's parked on my driveway so often, I figured people might assume it's mine to sell." His tone was light, but the words hit like daggers. Neighbors had started to gather on porches, pretending not to stare but very obviously watching. Phones were out, recording. Karen's voice cracked as she yelled about defamation, about lawsuits, about, "How dare you embarrass me like this?" Evan stood, walked over, and calmly pulled the sign from the ground. "Then don't park on my property again, and no one will get confused," he said, meeting her glare with quiet confidence. The crowd across the street erupted into muffled laughter. Karen, shaking with rage, climbed into her Porsche, slammed the door, and peeled off down the road, the sound of her tires echoing like a retreat. As the last bit of engine noise faded, Evan looked around, smiled faintly, and nodded to his neighbors. "Guess it sold faster than expected." Laughter rippled through the block. That night, as the sun dipped low and the street glowed under amber lights, Evan scrolled through his phone, seeing videos of the confrontation already spreading online. The caption under one read, "HOA Queen gets schooled, the driveway revolt." He leaned back, satisfied. For the first time in months, his driveway, and his peace, finally belonged to him again. The following week, Maplewood Estates was buzzing. Every conversation at the mailboxes, every neighborhood stroll, every whispered exchange over backyard fences circled around one topic: Karen's meltdown. The video of her screaming beside the "for sale" sign had become a local sensation, shared across community pages, tagged with captions like "HOA Queen loses her crown." Even the local news station mentioned it in passing during their light-hearted segment. But Evan stayed silent. He didn't brag or gloat, he simply went on with his life, trimming his hedges, walking his dog, smiling at the neighbors who now greeted him with a newfound respect. The calm before the storm didn't last long. A week later, a crisp white envelope arrived in his mailbox bearing the HOA's embossed logo. Inside was a formal notice of violation, issued by none other than Vice President Karen. The accusation: public defamation and disorderly conduct detrimental to community harmony. Evan almost laughed. The hypocrisy was staggering. He took the notice straight to the next HOA meeting, holding it between two fingers as he walked into the same fluorescent-lit hall. The air was thicker this time, the tension palpable. Karen sat at the table again, though her posture was noticeably stiffer, her once confident smile replaced with tight, uneasy lips. She avoided eye contact as Evan approached the microphone. "I received this notice," he began evenly, "from Ms. Karen here, accusing me of defamation. I'd like to clarify a few things before this board." His calm tone contrasted sharply with the unease rippling through the room. He opened his folder and began placing printed pages one by one, photos of the Porsche blocking his driveway on 7 different occasions, timestamps from his security camera footage, and finally, a copy of her handwritten note threatening him with a fine. The board members leaned in. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Karen's attempt to interrupt failed as the HOA chair, an older man named Thomas, raised his hand. "Let him finish," he said. Evan continued, flipping to the HOA bylaws highlighted in yellow. According to Article 14, Section 7, board members are expected to set a standard of compliance. Parking on another homeowner's property, issuing false violations, and retaliating against residents, those are all direct breaches. He placed the open booklet on the table. If I were to interpret these rules the way the HOA does for everyone else, Karen should be fined 3 times over. The silence that followed was heavy. Karen's face went pale, her fingers fidgeted nervously with a pen. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "He's twisting things. It was a misunderstanding." But Thomas's expression remained unmoved. "We've seen the evidence," he said quietly. "You can't deny the footage, Karen." For the first time since Evan had moved to Maplewood Estates, the power dynamic shifted. The board members exchanged glances, nodding in agreement. Thomas cleared his throat and said, "The board will vote to suspend Karen's vice presidency effective immediately pending review of conduct violations." Karen's composure shattered. "You can't do this to me. I am the HOA," she snapped, slamming her hand on the table. Her voice echoed through the hall, brittle and desperate. The neighbors watching from the back rows murmured. Evan didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Justice was speaking for him now. As Karen stormed out of the meeting, her heels clattering angrily against the tile, someone in the back muttered, "Guess the Queen just abdicated." Laughter rippled through the room like a long-overdue release of pressure. When the meeting adjourned, Thomas approached Evan quietly. "That was something," he said with a small smile. "You handled this better than most would." Evan nodded. "I wasn't looking for revenge," he replied, "just respect." Outside, the evening air was cool and still, the kind of calm that comes after a storm has passed. As he walked home under the glow of the streetlights, he could see the reflection of his garage door, unobstructed, peaceful, his again. The Porsche never returned to his driveway after that night. Karen's name was eventually removed from the HOA newsletter, replaced by a short note about restructuring. And though Evan didn't celebrate openly, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that for once, in the endless tug-of-war of suburban politics, fairness had actually won. A few weeks later, Maplewood Estates had settled into a strange new peace. The kind of quiet that comes after the loudest storm. The HOA meetings went on without shouting matches, the neighbors began waving to each other again, and for the first time in years, Evan's mornings were tranquil. The golden sunlight once again poured across his driveway, his clear, unclaimed, uninterrupted driveway. He stood on his porch with a mug of coffee, watching as dew sparkled on the hood of his car parked exactly where it should be. No silver Porsche, no condescending voice telling him what he could or couldn't do. Just stillness. He smiled faintly, a man savoring the quiet victory that didn't need an audience. A light breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and distant sprinklers. Across the street, a few neighbors waved as they walked their dogs, and one called out, "Hey Evan! You really gave her a run for her money." He chuckled, shaking his head modestly. "I just sold some bad habits," he replied, lifting his mug in a friendly salute. They laughed, but the line carried truth. He hadn't fought her with anger, only cleverness. The viral video had long since faded from the internet's short memory, but the lesson lingered in the neighborhood. Even the HOA had softened. Thomas, the new acting president, personally dropped by to apologize for how things had been handled. He promised reforms, transparency, respect, fairness. For the first time, the HOA didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a community again. One afternoon, while cleaning out his garage, Evan found the old for sale sign leaning against the wall. Dust clung to its corners, the red letters faded slightly, but it still made him grin. That ridiculous piece of cardboard had done what months of polite requests couldn't. It had balanced the scales. He leaned it against the fence by his porch, not as a trophy, but as a quiet reminder. A neighbor passing by stopped and smiled. "You keeping it as art now?" she asked. Evan shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just insurance," he said with a wink. They both laughed, but deep down, he knew it meant something more. It was proof that sometimes, the smallest act of wit could outsmart arrogance louder than any argument ever could. A few days later, he saw a moving truck parked near the end of the block, Karen's house. She stood outside, directing the movers, her once impeccable posture slouched beneath the weight of defeat. She caught Evan's eye for a brief second, no glare, no smirk, just a tired, hollow look. For the first time, she looked human. Evan gave her a polite nod. She hesitated, then gave one back before turning away. There was no need for words. The silence between them said everything. She left Maplewood Estates that afternoon, and the neighborhood exhaled. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops and the streetlights began to hum, Evan stood on his porch once more. The world felt balanced again. No tension, no petty power plays, no unwelcome cars in his space. Just peace. He took one last sip of coffee, looked at his freshly parked car in his spotless driveway, and smiled. "Not for sale," he murmured softly to himself. The camera would pull back slowly, the houses bathed in amber light, wind brushing through the trees, and the faint sound of laughter echoing from a distant barbecue. For all its drama, Maplewood Estates looked normal again, but beneath that quiet, a lesson lingered: respect your neighbors, or risk being the next story on someone's driveway.